The tradition of capturing individuals among North American indigenous peoples dates back to prehistoric times. Long before the arrival of European settlers, tribes engaged in the practice of taking captives from neighboring groups, either to replenish losses incurred in warfare or to obtain victims for retaliatory torture. As conflict escalated between Europeans and Native Americans, the abduction of white captives became commonplace, driven by similar motives, as well as the desire to hold them for ransom or leverage them for negotiations with allied European entities. The earliest documented European captives in Texas were Álvar Núñez Cabeza de Vaca and his 3 companions, survivors of a 1528 expedition. Despite utilizing their skills as medicine men to escape captivity, subsequent centuries witnessed numerous Spanish and Mexican captives enduring prolonged stays in the camps of Apache, Kiowa, Wichita, and most notably, Comanche raiders. In the decades following the outbreak of American Indian warfare with whites in the 1830s, many settlers experienced the harrowing ordeal of Comanche captivity. To better understand why this historical scenario was so feared, let's explore the hypothetical of what would happen if you were caught by the Comanche tribe. During the 1700s, Spanish attempts to establish settlements in Texas faced staunch resistance from the Comanche people, who effectively confined them to the southern regions. Despite the Spanish conquering numerous other American Indian cultures, they found themselves unable to overcome the formidable Comanche warriors, preventing any further northward expansion. As German and American settlers encroached upon Comanche territory, they inevitably provoked conflict and faced the consequences. The Comanches launched attacks on these settlers, seizing horses and cattle, much like they had done with other American Indian cultures and the Spanish. Engaging in their customary practices, the Comanches also took captives, often offering to return them in exchange for a ransom. Captives lived out an existence riddled with challenges, dangers, and sometimes death. Survival hinged on a band of captors' capricious nature, and more importantly, the resilience of those held captive. Adult male captives, if matured and in good health, often saw their lives misplaced by labor or imprisonment. West of the Mississippi River, and most notably Texas, saw adult women face an even greater chance at death in the hands of Comanche captors. Women were forced into servitude, either as a concubine or a drudge. With the sex work or menial labor came abuse and mistreatment, often leading to premature deaths, sometimes without the chance of a captive escaping or enacting revenge. Rachel Plummer and Sarah Horn, 2 infamous cases of Comanche capture, endured endless horrors through their imprisonment. However, it should be noted female abuse in camps was not universally applied throughout Comancheria. Some women received unbounded, if not unexpected, respect from their captors, assimilating into whichever band extended acceptance. It wasn't a bed of roses everywhere on the Western Plain, however, especially for captured children. Comanche marauders often inflicted fatal consequences upon captive children who fell behind during pursuits. However, those children who safely reached the American Indian village faced a different fate. They were frequently adopted to fill the void left by deceased relatives, and thereafter embraced as genuine sons or daughters. Many of these youngsters thrived in the untamed, liberated lifestyle of the indigenous Americans, becoming so deeply assimilated that redemption efforts proved challenging. Some of these youths evolved into formidable warriors, launching raids on settlements. White girls captured prior to hitting puberty typically underwent assimilation into the Comanche way of life, and often married high-ranking leaders and warriors of the band. One notable example is Cynthia Ann Parker, who married Comanche chief Pita Nocona and bore Kawana Parker, the final war chief of the entire Comanche nation. Matilda Lockhart, captured at 13 and subjected to harsh treatment by a band of Comanches played a pivotal role in the 1840 Council House fight in San Antonio, when she accused the Comanche of concealing other captives. The woman who cared for Lockhart after her release, Mary Ann Maverick, described the teenage girl in the following manner. She was utterly degraded and could not hold her head up again. Her head, arms, and face were full of bruises and sores, and her nose actually burnt off to the bone, all the fleshy end gone, and a great scab formed on the end of the bone. Both nostrils were wide open and denuded of flesh. She told a piteous tale of how dreadfully the Indians had beaten her, and how they would wake her from her sleep by sticking a chunk of fire to her flesh, especially to her nose. Her body had many scars from the fire. While this is widely accepted by many contemporary accounts of the 1840 Council House fight, it should be noted Maverick's testimony did not come until months after Lockhart was recovered, and no one else present at Lockhart's return to her original family reported such grisly injuries or experiences at the time, including Matilda herself. Regardless of specific details, the teenage girl certainly suffered an excruciating kidnapping. Such a scenario rarely provided anything but atrocities in the first place. Numerous Texas captives found salvation or were redeemed through the efforts of relatives, Texas Rangers, soldiers, American Indian agents, or traders. Of course, the demographic with the least hope of survival were infants and the elderly. Babies and older folks were often seen more as nuisances to their nomadic lifestyle and were killed off rather than set free if they proved to be a hindrance. So why all of the violence, you ask? Renowned not only for their expertise in torment, but also for being the most fierce and triumphant warriors, the Comanche earned the moniker Lords of the Plains. In their expansion into the vast American South Plains during the late 18th century, originating from the Rocky Mountains, they not only asserted dominance over local tribes, but nearly eradicated the Apaches, a renowned group of exceptional horse warriors themselves. A pivotal factor in the Comanche's ruthless ascendancy lay in their superior adaptation to horses compared to the Apaches. Horses, absent in the Americas until introduced by Spanish conquistadors, catalyzed the transformation of the Comanche from a modest, primitive tribe in the present-day Wyoming and Montana region to a formidable force after encountering escaped Spanish Mustangs from Mexico around 1700. Their unparalleled ferocity, combined with his strategic adaptation, facilitated their territorial dominance, surpassing that of any other American Indian tribe. The expansive Comancheria, spanning over at least 250,000 square miles, became a force that not only terrorized Mexico, but also halted the Spanish colonization of America. Horses stolen for riding and cattle acquired for trade, often exchanged for firearms, fueled their influence. In their marauding expeditions, they butchered livestock, pilfered settlements, and engaged in gruesome acts, such as kidnapping and torture, regardless of their captive's ethnicity or skin color. These atrocities led to one historical account out of Mexico grimly describing the West under Comanche rule as a land of 1,000 deserts. When Comanche warriors faced death, their sense of honor obligated them to seek revenge, a pursuit involving both torture and death. The sheer terror instilled by such Comanche brutality led to the attribution of almost all Native American raids to them. Inhabitants of the Texan and Mexican territories, as well as neighboring American Indian communities, harbored an acute apprehension associated with the full moon, referred to as the Comanche moon in Texas. This lunar phase marked the ominous arrival of the Comanche, who sought cattle, horses, and captives. Renowned for their sadistic practices, the Comanche entrusted the tormenting process primarily to women. Captive American and Mexican soldiers were subjected to gruesome fates, such as being roasted alive over open fires. Some endured the horrifying ordeal of being castrated and scalped while still conscious. Among the most excruciating Comanche tortures was the burial of captives up to their chins, coupled with the removal of their eyelids, exposing their eyes to the scorching sun until death by starvation. Historical records also recount instances of captives being spread-eagled and left exposed on a bed of red ants, often following the removal of their private parts, which were then placed in their mouths, the lips subsequently sewn together. Another method involved binding captives in untreated leather, left to endure the sun's blistering heat as the green rawhide gradually constricted, ultimately leading to the prisoner's demise. T.R. Fehrenbach, the historian behind Comanche, The History of a People, cited a Spanish account detailing Comanche torture methods inflicted upon Tonkawa Indian captives. This included burning their hands and feet until the nerves were destroyed, followed by amputation of these extremities and a recurrence of the fiery ordeal on fresh wounds. Alive and scalped, the Tonkawas faced further mutilation as their tongues were forcibly torn out to stifle their agonized screams. The Comanche consistently fought with unyielding determination, expecting no mercy as they anticipated the treatment accorded to their own captives. Infants were routinely met with fatal outcomes during raids, yet it must be acknowledged that encountering Comanche women and children often led soldiers and settlers to commit acts of violence. The ferocity exhibited by the Comanche could be, in part, attributed to their brutal interactions with the notoriously savage Spanish colonists and subsequent encounters with Mexican bandits and soldiers. However, a more compelling hypothesis suggests that the absence of centralized leadership within the Comanche contributed significantly to their cruel practices. You see, the Comanche bands formed loose alliances of warrior raiders, resembling a confederation of smaller street gangs. In every societal framework, the most aggressive individuals tend to be adolescents and those in their 20s. Even if inclined to do so, Comanche tribal chiefs lacked the means to restrain their young men from engaging in raiding activities. However, the Texas Rangers proved to be formidable adversaries for the Comanche. Operating as a resilient guerrilla force, they mirrored the merciless tactics of their Comanche counterparts. Despite being adversaries, there existed a begrudging respect between the two groups. A character from Lonesome Dove, Rangers dryly remarked that if a band of Comanche had ever reached at least 1,000 warriors, it would have been enough to overtake the nation's capital. Fascinatingly, the Comanche, while displaying hostility towards all rival tribes and encountered groups, demonstrated an absence of racial bias. They bolstered their ranks by incorporating young white or Mexican captives who, if deemed to possess warrior potential and could endure initiation rites, could attain full membership within the tribe. The captives deemed less robust might find themselves sold as slaves to Mexican traders or, more frequently, met with a brutal demise. Despite the harshness of their circumstances, some young captives, upon being ransomed, struggled to acclimate to settled, civilized life and chose to flee, seeking reunion with their tribal kin. Quanah Parker, the prominent chief, emerged as the son of the earlier mentioned captive Cynthia Ann Parker. Her rescue followed the death of Quanah's father in a Texas Rangers raid. Unable to readjust to civilized existence, Parker eventually succumbed to self-imposed starvation. Again, it should be noted many of these accounts of torture via Comanche captivity come from contemporary analysis of U.S. history. The full extent of these depraved acts will probably never be known, like much of Old West history lost to time and myth-making.